Today is the 8th of May, 2022. Thanks for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe to my official YouTube channel, as well as if you're going to leave a comment, please make sure to have etiquette and respect. Additionally, share my official YouTube channel links as far as my videos for my official YouTube channel, and go to my website, www.susanmealing.com. So I'm going to discuss a few different factors that may and or may not be known about different sectors in regards of life. Most specifically, what is supposed to be a grouping, I should say, for consenting biological adults above a biological age, in my opinion, of the minimum without any special needs at the age of 18, and if above the age of 18, though, has certain special needs as far as developmental aspects or health aspects above the age of 21 minimum biologically. Back in the year, if I remember correctly, somewhere around 2004, maybe 2003 or 2005, I remember listening to, I think it was Bill O'Reilly, and he had interviewed a female named Jenna Jameson. She was very interesting to listen to, not just what she had said in reference to the interview that she had done on Bill O'Reilly at the time, though also certain situations that seemed unspoken that kind of caught my attention, despite what I understood that they were discussing. And as a biological adult, despite only having been awake from my coma after my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2004, either 3, 4, or 5 years, and still having had the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain at that time, while dealing with headaches and migraines, learning how to deal with those pain levels, in addition to the memory deficits and cognitive disorders, and having gone from college algebra with trigonometry and calculus to second grade math, having at that point in time still learning the names of colors while doing the best I could as far as being a mom in that particular situation, and additionally still working on learning how to count because of the damages from my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 during basic training, and probably the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain probably did some damages regarding my arithmetic levels. I listened, and even before my head injury, I could listen differently. It was something that certain individuals kind of didn't really know what to do sometimes because of how those particular factors are. And after my head injury and waking up from my coma, it was already strong beforehand. So after waking up from my coma, well, that was much different. It was still similar, though, in comparison to in person, listening sometimes to certain news reports or documentaries or interviews. I could hear certain other situations that were a bit different. And so if I remember correctly, more recently on Twitter, if I remember correctly, she had taken some time to herself. And so hopefully that is for the best, those particular references. And so in that regard, those particular situations, I have been involved with what is supposed to be considered the adult consenting lifestyle for a while. And I have been fairly adamant about different aspects of health and wellness in regards of the actual health and wellness, not just in the physical capacities of what is supposed to be considered the biological adult lifestyle aspects, though also in reference to the mental and emotional health and well-being, because of the knowledge, unfortunately or fortunately, however you choose to view that, in reference of the thought process, not in the other capacity, because there is those situations where it is considered a violation of privacy in those regards. So while some people might not see that as a big deal, someone such as myself does. So when there are violations of privacy, those particular factors are problematic, especially to someone such as myself who picks up on that. And so when there is not the consent in any capacity, which of course I would be against violation of privacy, because I would not consent to that at all, then there are those factors to take into consideration, because of certain types of individuals that think that they have a right to something that they don't. And that actually is, in my opinion, a different version, though it has been proven regarding the laws in the federal capacity. So illegal recordings of that are a violation and an assault in a different way. So certain types of individuals who don't see it in that capacity, there are those who do, such as myself. So in that particular reference, where the pop culture phenomenon has been as it's been, individuals that would not see anything wrong with that, that's the problem. See, it's a different capacity in reference to certain individuals, such as that Mad Max 151 situation, where individuals might wonder why that wouldn't be looked at highly upon. Similarly to at the Alamo Draft House in San Antonio, Texas, at 410 and 151, how it was a surprise to the individuals who had been a part of that as to why it wouldn't be seen by the individual from Mad Max as something positive. It made perfect sense to me, even though I wasn't a part of it and I had learned about it later. It was one of those particular situations where it shouldn't be considered as rocket science, because that's a violation of quite a few different factors beyond just the lack of a parade license. And so, while I haven't denied having been a part of certain areas, though I have maintained my numerical factors at a low because of my own modesty, because of what I've personally dealt with well before being a biological adult. And so individuals that wouldn't have the common sense to ever think outside of that, any female that wouldn't see that as a problem, I view as a feminazi. Because why would you be anything but that? Because no female that would actually be a feminist would ever consider that in any other capacity other than, while they might think otherwise, or I should say maybe they might try to convince themselves otherwise, it's not, because of the violation. Especially if you know that someone would not partake, if they had been informed as to whether or not they'd consent. Because if you know that they would not consent, then that does not make you any different than those particular factors. You might wish that in the separation from, due to whatever hypotheticals, there are reasons why I believe the term of it's illegal for revenge porn. So it would be in that capacity, in those references, in my opinion. Legally, because of those federal laws, officially, it would be an extension of, because of those factors, especially depending on what the intentions. So if the intentions are the knowledge that it would not be something that would be agreed to, and or there's any situations thereof, that does not actually disclude that. That actually enforces that in a larger way. And so those types of females that wouldn't see that as a problem are the problem, realistically. They might think otherwise, and yet the irony is, even if they were told, what would the difference be regarding the male factor in those references? So where certain males have tried to convince themselves otherwise, even though the definition of, I would not be surprised if there would be females that would try to convince themselves otherwise. This is why I make the distinguishing factor as to the difference between a feminist and a feminazi. Because a feminazi wouldn't care, at first, unless it were to impact them. Unless they were to be informed and actually see the legal writing as to those factors. Because that's the reality. Now, I don't know much about Jenna Jameson in an overall sort of way. I know that she decided to make a business for herself and do what she could to actually educate females, which is quite commendable. I would not be surprised if there were certain needless problems due to certain types of females, or who I would consider as feminazis. And most likely, in my opinion, in my guesstimation, it would be in the professional problem of those factors. So individuals that would be professional dominatrixes that wouldn't have the intellectual capacity to see the problems with their choices of behavior. Probably the lack of common sense to ever think that because of whatever assumptions. And there are prior official YouTube videos of mine you can take into consideration on that. And so even if, in a hypothetical, that Jenna Jameson had been involved in whatever communal aspects, that would be in this hypothetical of her own free will and informed consent compared to. Now, where my biological mother informed me that in regards of Robin Hood, and okay, fine, became the main character of Maid Marian. Not by choice, though. That's something that I've repeatedly explained. That's not something I ever enjoyed. Didn't ever want to be a part of. Absolutely despised Crystal Lake South fully for it. There wasn't anybody involved with that play that I had any sympathy for. They would know as far as how things were after the end of that play. How I refused to speak with them, not because I thought I was better than them, because I couldn't stand the sight of them. I actually could not stand looking at them simply because they knew that I did not want to be a part of it. They knew that I wasn't interested. And so I could not stand the sight of them. So that would be why, in comparison. So if you take in consideration certain other factors where, such as Temple of Flesh, where I was carried on stage against my will, and I decided certain things in reference to my modeling. That was then. That was 2009. This is now in 2022. Those particular factors of any type in any violation is exactly that, a violation. You cannot consider it a consenting adult lifestyle if you do that. There is no aspect to informed consent because it has to be everybody involved, specifically the individuals involved in that capacity of. So while some people might wish in a hypothetical that it would be considered as consent, it wouldn't be, ever. Because the individuals involved officially would have to both, or if there's more, depending on your situation, fully be informed. If not, it is a violation, in my opinion. So those particular individuals regarding whether Temple of Flash or what is supposed to be considered the adult consenting lifestyle, or in reference to those types of those professional dominatrixes, that is the fact where it would be considered a violation. Just because those types of individuals would feel comfortable in those capacities, well, that lets you know if they were to ever violate that. Because why would they ever consider themselves professional at all? The irony is they would be the antithesis of professional. Because in order to actually be professional, that requires certain forms of informed consent, as well as actual professionalism, in comparison to those types of those levels in comparison. And so as in the reference of what would be biological females, or who I would consider as feminazis in this hypothetical, those types wouldn't ever think about anything except that, hypothetically, because that's only where their thought processes are. They just remain in that level in comparison to ever thinking about anything else. So if you go to my website, www.susanmeeling.com, and you go to the books section, I have authored fiction book series named Paroxysm of the Lotus. And those types I could easily see not having the common sense as to anything other than that level. How they wouldn't have the common sense to ever see what actual informed consent would be. I could easily see those types keeping their minds in that lower level of, because of the lack of common sense. And so because of certain other areas as to the online factor, I would guesstimate they wouldn't pay attention to those legalities. Because why would they? Why would someone in those capacities, especially having been in Washington State, ever think of those situations? Because in Washington State, they have higher levels of privacy laws. They have different capacities of mandatory, per location, legal situations. So for example, in the state of Texas, as long as there is the individual who is responsible, so in reference to an apartment, not the individuals who own the property, not the maintenance staff. No. It would be the individual leasee who would have to have the legal knowledge. And they would be the only individual who would legally be allowed to put any recording devices up. Otherwise, it would break those laws in reference to no soliciting, private property, so on and so forth, in those legal factors, because it would be considered a violation of privacy. They would have to be in their apartment in those references. So any wishful thought in regards of company management, maintenance staff, even landscapers, officially, legally would not have that authority by the definition of the law. So then you take in consideration the difference when I was living in Washington State. In that location, you have to have legal paperwork, and this is an irony regarding Texans that I had known that had wanted more democratic policies. I was born and raised in New Jersey. I know about these situations. This is why you can't do certain type of filming in New York City, because any recognizable building in the background, you actually have to do certain legal paperwork. Same thing in New Jersey because of those democratic policies. Don't let the word democratic fool you. Because while, yes, it was a democracy to get to that level, in order for certain factors, you have to have certain legal paperwork. So in the city of Seattle or the state of Washington, the levels of mandatory paperwork is among the democratic policies. You can take a reference to when I was at the McMillan Mausoleum. While there were anybody in the area who could have heard me and seen me speaking directly to the camera regarding that lecture, anybody that would try to claim otherwise, if they walked up as they did towards the end, could not ever complain about being involved because of the knowledge of seeing that going on. It's very different. It's my choice, my camera phone, all that sort of stuff. In comparison, so there was the show called Guardian Assholes. If you go to my original Facebook account, which I've contacted about, though that is what it is regarding, but my website is www.susanmeeling.com. That one was called Dark Lily at the end, but it was originally Susan Meeling because of certain factors I had explained that I was dealing with at the time. I had shown people these messages I was dealing with. This is before the Leatherati post for clarifications. So for those who know about the Leatherati post, I was receiving those. It is as it is. And so I did the best that I could, and I have explained it since my update regarding since the year of 2019 in my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmeeling.com. So, in regards of the Guardian Asshole show, well, they're based in the Washington State area. If they actually had done the legal research, they would know that in the state of Washington, the laws are much more similar to New Jersey and New York City. So per location, they would legally have to get every individual involved to have signed documentation per day, not an overall blanket, because you can't do that way. It's a very, democratic policies are extremely strict. See, Republican policies are far more lenient because they are capitalistic. Democratic policies are not. So, in the reference of the show Guardian Assholes, or whatever they changed the name to because of whatever aspects of, legally, per day, if they went, so for example, the boxing location, per day that we were there, legally, they would have to get a signed piece of paper from each and every individual, plus the owner of the property. And if I'm accurate, if there's anything in the background regarding any other businesses, unlike an official YouTube channel video, however, you cannot harass or stalk. There are those factors. So, but in this reference, they would have to get legal paperwork signed for each and every location thereof in the background because of those factors of the right to privacy. And so, additionally to that, in regards of the only location they would be allowed to just have one piece of paper signed regarding those waivers would only be at the garage area that was converted into the studio. That's the only one that would be allowed, but it would have to be renewed each year. So if 1 year went by, the paperwork would have to be renewed because of the democratic policies. In those references, Hollywood would know that's why you have Hollywood lots, where you have the different studio locations and all those situations that you have to do because of the legalities regarding other states and cities and privacy rights. And so any other location, this is another reason why when I had brought up to those individuals that if they wanted to have anything to do with my Medal of Honor art project trips, they would have to legally, I didn't say legally, I figured it was common sense being in Washington state. Also, the knowledge of the Medal of Honor symbol is a federally recognized symbol that is copyrighted regarding that particular aspect as a part of the armed forces of the United States of America. This is why I had informed them they had to contact me specifically because of additionally traveling across state lines. Anything else would be in a different situation. And while yes, I have the leniency factors in regards of individuals who they themselves signed the dotted line because of whatever their backgrounds might be, these particular situations, because of my knowledge of not knowing every military installation, and so those particular factors that I personally knew, if there were to be that, what I would need to do in comparison. These are not just in regards of the spiritual, religious, energetic portions, other factors as to those legal mandatory situations. Especially when you take in consideration my invitation to Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, as well as my paperwork regarding when I was enlisted in the Army at the age of 17 years old with the clearance that I had for the particular MOS, because that particular MOS. And so even though I'm not active duty, National Guard, reservist, or even technically veteran by my own standards, I do have a blue ID card. And so I've had certain understandings and I've discussed certain things before my head injury in regards of my particular plans for my military career. So in that particular reference regarding the show that was called initially Guardian Assholes, those factors of the seriousness was not a joke. So the modern day book has that reference point on my website, www.susanmealing.com. That additionally is a different factor. And so while some of the other states, Oregon has certain similarities to Washington state. Montana might not. However, Montana has whatever military bases in whatever location of. Similarly to Idaho and Utah and Nevada, they may or may not. I don't personally know. However, what I do know is there would be certain legalities that I would have to make sure if I had ever had that return discussion, because I personally wouldn't allow certain things because of knowing security measures. And so, while thankfully I did not have any issues personally beyond a few things that I've brought forward, those factors, on the other hand, I cannot speak for because of my knowledge or lack thereof to the specifics of each individual state. So here's another example. In the year of 2018, there was an odd sensation I had, which not the exact same as when listening to the interview from Jenna Jameson with Bill O'Reilly, but certain sensations energetically that seemed odd, other than my medication situations, which that's a whole other ball of wax. So I had actually contacted how my son and I wound up in Washington State, and I specifically asked, are there any military installations in the state of Iowa? Because I couldn't find anything on my cell phone. And knowing that cell phone data usage compared to a tablet, compared to a desktop, is different regarding what information will pull up. It's not just by the website, it's by specific types of devices. And so I was informed there wasn't. There were recruiter stations, which translates to it's just one big military installation, no matter where you go. That's my interpretation. Now, while I don't have that particular clarification, I would not be surprised if, because of and I've researched to see, and I haven't seen a military base, which again then translates to me that the entire state of Iowa would be a military installation, which again I did not allow anyone to go with me because of security concerns, and if there was the interest, then I would be spoken with because of that common sense factor. And just because, especially in reference to active duty, National Guard and reservists, specifically those individuals, depending on what their clearance level would translate to other things in reference to their own military careers. So if they had something to do with something that they weren't invited to, because that's a different set of factors. So somebody could be pushed into early retirement for a violation, for an example. So maybe they were going to be involved for another 5-10 years, and here's your paperwork. Here's your severance check. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. That's the way it is. Depending on the situation as to those particular hypotheticals, because there would be the knowledge regarding my personal digital footprint, proverbially, in reference to my text messages, most specifically, because that's where I actually was online the most, because of. So while in my website, www.susanmealing.com, the days where I had posted on my journal blog are pretty much it. And while yes, I ordered things from Amazon, that would be the time frame of, and that's it. Now, I can't be the only person who leaves a browser window open. That's different, obviously. And so, at that time, the situations were as the situations were. And so, I didn't ever inform anybody, except for I will be going to these states at this time. I didn't even do a printout in reference to my specific itinerary for the individual in regards of it, albeit, it was an overall situation. And so making sure that I could do the best as I could, as I explained in in regards of the modern day book because of the knowledge in those references, because of the sensitivity regarding the possibilities of where I would be driving through. And making sure, not just in reference to military installations, however, there are these groups called contractors. And with those particular references, I know better. And anybody who's a contractor in one of those particular factors, well, then that's a different situation. Because if you don't have the clearance regarding those types of contracting, well, it's a similar situation in certain references. So, here's your severance, and you're done in those references. Because if you don't have employment in those areas, you could be a part of the same company. If you don't have clearance to be in those areas, you don't have clearance to be in those areas. It's common sense. And so depending on the company and contracting areas and so on and so forth. And yes, I had the security cameras that I put in the front and the back of my car that I had taken because of just in case referencing collisions. I wanted to make sure of that. Soon as getting back, I didn't even look, to be honest, in reference to the security footage, because it wasn't something that I personally needed. I would check to see the news in the area as a just in case of maybe being in the vicinity, and then that would be the end of that in comparison. So I didn't ever do that sort of stuff. I thought it was just better, in my opinion, in comparison. I knew better. So I would clear out the little chippy things instantly after checking the areas to verify that they didn't need anything. And that was the end of it, to make sure. And so, while other people might consider whatever that would be, it does go to security concerns and knowing better. Those factors are as those factors are. So in reference to Washington State and those types of situations, it would literally be so there was a point in time at a bar location. Well, legally, they would have to get a set of forms signed by the bar itself, and then each of the employees and everybody in that location. And that would include me. Now, I knew this back then. I acknowledge that. I knew that. I wasn't ever asked, though. That wasn't my job. It's a reality. And so where I did make attempts to ask some questions, usually instead the discussion went however the way the discussion went. And it was as it was. So that's not a legal situation for me to handle, that's a legal situation for them to handle because of those legalities. Very different between the state of Texas to the state of Washington. In the state of Texas, despite the state, well, you're a big fish in a small pond in reference to a metaphor regarding those particular factors. In the state of Washington, however, if individuals from the state of Texas were to go to the state of Washington, well, they'd be a small fish in the ocean because of those laws. They wouldn't know which way to follow what bubbles because they wouldn't know what bubbles would look as in those areas. In that hypothetical. And so any factor of, whether through the cloud, because that would be automatic, and there is the facts in reference to after a certain year regarding digital cameras, the time frame that they started advertising Wi-Fi for digital cameras about 5 to 10 years beforehand is when Wi-Fi actually was within those cameras, just for clarification. So, automatically uploaded, whether or not some people understood that. I made attempts to explain to people when I was in the state of Texas. They didn't want to listen to me because they knew a guy, or they knew a guy, or they knew a guy. I was just born and raised in New Jersey, growing up around the tri-state area, and I was just raised by a biological mother who did information technology coding back in the 1980s and 1990s. Biological father, who's first generation Chinese. Bok Gong and Bok Pu had escaped Mao Zedong, and where are most technology pieces made? So, there are those factors, literally, if you had a ease on that. And so I made attempts to explain some stuff, and nobody wanted to listen to me, because why would they? What would I ever be capable to discuss, or in this case, lecture, because I was having the issues with the technology at the time, which I still do. It is what it is, because my childhood, in comparison, realizing that I was working with certain programs and processing aspects, and seeing the stuff now in the year 2022, and certain processing aspects still haven't come out. Well, I did tell people in the state of Texas that the technology out in the general public was a minimum of 20 to 25 years older than what they thought was new. So, in that particular reference, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, was the number 10. So technically, if it were to be, I'll say, make it an easy number and say 1990, well, this is 2022. And only recently have I learned that 10 had just come out. And so that would be 32 years, which would be within the exact margin that I had explained in those time frames. And so I made attempts to explain to people, because the general public was not going to get certain technological devices for the overall consumptions in those references without certain legal factors, because of what is safest for the general public, because of especially those legal factors that have continuously gone the way they have. And so in the comparison of the state of Texas to Washington state, those laws have been around for a while regarding Washington state. And so while there have been those who have wanted to try to subvert certain factors, there are those that just really probably wouldn't have had the common sense to think about that. And it would be as it would be for them. Now, in reference to the fact that I had volunteered at Club Sapphire, well, on the property, there are signs that says it's private property. That translates similarly to a dual situation. One, in reference to all of the businesses in that complex. Similarly to the boxing location, where you'd have to have the property owner go through paperwork, and each and every business, just because of the overall complex of those two buildings. Plus, because of where it is, and in reference to Sapphire specifically, due to the light situation regarding across the parking lot, legally they'd have to get that as well, at the minimum. And if other areas, especially with signature signs, they would have to get what would be diagonally across the street as well, because of the visual. It's a Hollywood situation that would be capable to understand that. Those democratic laws, that's a very good example regarding for those who would be interested in that. And so then, because of the literal biological adult nature of what Sapphire would be considered as, each evening they would have to re-sign the actual paperwork because of those factors. Each time would have to be an actual signature, not the same as wishful thinking regarding certain types. And so it'd be one thing after another, each and every evening for each and every individual that would attend. Legally, they would have to. As far as if there's any connection directly to that. Now, I acknowledge I had asked on behalf of, and I was going to speak with, though the situations went as the way they went because of other situations. So, if they had made whatever choices they made, well, then those would be the choices that they made. However, the legalities would extend to each and every business in that complex automatically because of the legalities. And you can see that similarly in regards of the Macmillan Mausoleum situation. So that's a fact regarding the reference of individuals showing up on the property, because some people would show up on the property and not necessarily attend the actual event. So without those legal signatures in this hypothetical for the reference of, legally they could not do that without certain stipulations. And so there are those factors because of. Now, if it was whatever aspects in regards of my books that I authored, and let's say somebody falsely represented themselves to the Amazon company, and if they falsely represented themselves to the Amazon company, claiming that somehow we were friends, well, that would be something that they would have bore false witness on. And the ease of that would be through my cell phone, text messages, and phone calls. If they gave false representation in any capacity, legally, Amazon would have the capability to review that and handle that because of the false representation, because of the legalities in each capacity. And so if in this hypothetical there were individuals that didn't think it would be that big of a deal, well, they would actually be inaccurate in every capacity because of those legalities. So whenever Jenna Jameson had ever begun her particular business, there would be some factors that she would be capable, I'm sure, especially since it was the early 2000s, that I remembered listening to the interview between her and Bill O'Reilly, that she would be capable to discuss certain legalities that she would know as to the way those factors went. So, in regards of certain situations, as to a particular group that I did not know that every one of them were professional dominatrixes. I was under the impression that it was just female dominance. And yes, the possibilities of some being professional in comparison. And so there's my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susankneeling.com. And so in those hypotheticals, if that were to be, especially after Austin and that situation, well, automatically they would have lied to Amazon because of the Austin location, automatically. And so, in turn, the automatic false representation to Amazon would be for those people to take in consideration. Additionally, let's say some individuals went and showed pictures. Maybe went somewhere, or maybe what have you. If they told the truth, though. Because if they didn't tell the truth, well, then that's a different capacity, and it goes back to that false representation. And that would be considered illegal for those people to do that, especially in the state of Washington. Not just the state of Washington, in multitude of areas, however, that would be among that. And so, in those hypotheticals, in those references of the possibilities, whether regarding the DFW area that's supposed to be considered the adult consenting lifestyle, whether that's in reference to the Austin area of what's supposed to be the consenting adult lifestyle, and or in the San Marcos and San Antonio area of what's supposed to be the consenting adult lifestyle, well, there's a difference, because if those individuals were to have done so, they wouldn't think about the legalities of my blue ID card because of certain factors, because why would they care to ever think about that? Their hypothetical thought process would be that I didn't graduate basic training. Those individuals would then trigger a problematic situation because of there not being the allowance of, because they wouldn't know those details, because they would actually have to ask. If they were to have done any recording without any permission regarding not just my Medal of Honor art project trips, though most specifically in what is supposed to be the adult consenting lifestyle, they officially would cause a triggering within the system because of the legalities of the UCMJ. Though those types of people wouldn't think about it, because why would they? Especially civilians, because why would they know anything about that? Even if there was the explanation, such as in my book, Finding a Silver Lining. And so, while I would be clear, because it would have to be with the actual knowledge in comparison, and have to be at the time of as well. It couldn't be, as in this particular reference, of the possibility for this lecture in the year of 2022. Though the ramifications to those individuals, that would be different. I believe the term would be a DT sort of aspect. You can refer to the modern day book, because of the facts that those people would officially need my permission, and they don't have that. With that clarification, that would clear my blue ID card status and reinstate me at the status that I was before any such situations, though those individuals would be held accountable because of the legalities. Because while, yes, I did not graduate basic training for the Army, I was invited to attend Marine and Science Technology School with a Navy attachment. There is my background regarding my biological mother and my biological father, and additionally, you have my scuba diving work, which legally, those civilians would not have any legal authority to be involved with that, especially if there's civilian recreational scuba divers involved because of the direct attachment to. But that would require common sense as well as discussions. And in order to have discussions, that would require actually being capable to, compared to lectures, because of security reasons. So those types of those situations where those wouldn't think about that, because why would they? The facts are, I did. Which is why when you look at my modeling and my performances, I remain clothed at all times. I have not ever consented to certain types of images or videos, as I clarified regarding the modern day book on my website, www.susanmealing.com. So there are those particular references to take into consideration. And anybody that would wish in another capacity in that hypothetical would have to take that into consideration. So while some people might have whatever opinions, that's whatever opinions. So I have a pattern of behavior for decades. Those individuals that would have to take that in consideration for themselves because of. Now, yes, there in this reference the possibility of the civilian sector, and then what do you do because of the UCMJ? Well, there are still the federal and state guidelines, with the additional protections in reference to being an ordained reverend, on top of the proven facts, including which my biological mother, biological father, and biological sister legally wouldn't have authority. Yet again, one and only sponsor, my ex-in-laws, would not be allowed officially. My ex-in-laws actually would be the least allowed because of the dress blue situation automatically. Because of the stone engraving, they're literally in the Bible, thou shalt not make engraven images. Regarding, you can refer that to that dress blues situation. They would be the least allowed of any involvement whatsoever, just because of those dress blues. That'd be across the board by UCMJ standards. So while I will give a reference of two males that I had dated, both had directly signed the dotted line, as far as the Army and the Navy. They would be different in comparison to the pattern of behavior in regard of the dress blues. Any more continuation of those dress blues, not in reference to in the lectures that I have provided, as well as my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, of defining the stolen valor problems, but in the ways that my ex-in-laws have proven to repeat. So if in those references, which would include my biological mother and or biological father and or biological sister, if they were to perpetuate those dress blues, automatically they already knew that it was stolen valor, they knew it was problematic, and those individuals would be held accountable according to, including, and not limited to, the individuals associated with, because of whatever knowledge thereof. So in this particular reference, for two males that I had dated, one having signed the dotted line in reference to the Army, and one having signed the dotted line in reference to the Navy, different time frames, different years, that would be a different capacity, depending on their MOSs, their clearances, and so on and so forth, compared to the other situations. Depending on other factors, that would be up to other areas in comparison to me. But that is a starting point. Now, you have a different capacity of an individual regarding how he had been in security. Well, insecurity is just that. That's not anything. It's not a background clearance to the same level. It could be, depending on, but again, the proof. And it would have to be genuinely earned in comparison to a name or mommy and daddy doing something because of the clearances and those factors. Now, from what I remember, that individual, I had done what I could to talk him out of quite a few things. He did not like it. As I've brought up in regards of the Bank of America Tower in downtown Dallas situations, I brought up the situations regarding driving around in the vehicle regarding Irving, Texas, and I've also brought up the Deloitte situation. Well, during the driving around as well as Deloitte, he was moonlighting at the lodge in Dallas, and I had told him against what he was wanting to do. I had done what I could to discourage him from being involved with that because of knowing the legalities. However, his complaint was either that it was semantics. Well, it's legalities, not semantics. He claimed it was tirade. It's not. It's legalities. Anybody who has that knowledge of certain background check situations, certain other factors are as they are, whether certain individuals realize it or not. So if you don't take your job employment seriously, as proven factors, such as the exotic Easter situation, among a few other factors, those patterns of behavior. So when he tried to claim that he could do more with, I think his name was John, it was one of those, no, you can't. You couldn't even maintain the Bank of America Tower in Dallas. What would ever make you think that you could take over that and actually do it correctly? He tried to claim that he could take these different courses to a degree, and yet not, because it depends on who would be teaching those courses. The irony, if he had actually paid attention and listened correctly in comparison to other situations, he actually had the one and only person who could have actually assisted in security runs in the Bank of America Tower, Dallas situation in ways. And yes, there are plenty of companies who do certain things. I don't deny that. There are other factors that I'm going to guesstimate the proof of, give a different perspective in those references, such as my babysitter's husband who had me do security runs regarding the Twin Tower area for some, but if you know what the Twin Tower area is, which one? Because of him being a director of security for the World Trade Center and World Trade Center Plaza. That's a very different type of security run. It's a very different type of security check. So in a larger capacity, you can take in consideration my Medal of Honor Art Project trips in some ways, if that just so happened to ironically possibly be necessary. because maybe there were certain situations that, similarly to listening regarding to that particular interview between Jenna Jameson and Bill O'Reilly, maybe, and there are those who would know far better than I as to whether or not that security run was needed. If I just picked up on it and did the best as, hopefully as best as I could regarding my son and my daughter, of course, but my son, and then doing the security run as best as I could. If that was something that was actually necessary, I wouldn't know. I haven't officially been informed. However, I do know that since March of 2020, there's been that particular situation, and then there's been social distancing, and the other mandates as to a few factors because of, and so then there's the additional portions referencing the merger between T-Mobile and Sprint. Sprint, as I recently remembered, is the only cell phone company that has been allowed on a military installation as far back as 2004 or 2005 was when I learned that Sprint was the only cell phone carrier allowed in, for who knows what this is, the etcetera, or the Class 6, or the commissary, not really the commissary, but depending on the base, because there are those who would know what I'm referring to. And so Sprint was allowed. Not T-Mobile, because T-Mobile wasn't around back in 2004 and 2005. Not Verizon. Verizon wasn't, you could have a Verizon phone, but the kiosk or the business. So those who know, you have Burger King. You don't really have McDonald's. Maybe some places do, but you usually, it is a guarantee you're gonna have a Burger King. If you are near, if I remember correctly. So then you have like the food court locations and the PX, PXtra, depending on the way that's arranged. And so you have certain companies that in some locations you might find. In other locations, you only find on a military installation, and that's it. You might find one or two of that chain in another area, but most likely not. Might be in one, it's probably a small population town full of a bunch of guys who had been in the military at some point in time. I'm gonna guesstimate, you know, and you know, it's not in a major city area, and it's just one of those types of situations. So, you know, like for example, if I remember, only more recently, and again, this is 2022, if I remember correctly, it was 2019 or 2020 for the first time of seeing, I know it's an orange sign, so that's all I remember. However, they hadn't fully built it yet. Though, if I remember correctly, I don't recall seeing that particular on any other military installation. And so that's something to take in consideration. So people can find a Burger King pretty much within a certain distance to a degree. However, anybody who's been stationed on a military installation, you know Burger King's always there. I know at Fort Sam Houston, there was one in the basement of BAMC, and then I knew that there was one over by the commissary, PXtra. I know that for a fact. I am how I am. I like my Burger King. I have my preferences. So, there is that to take in consideration regarding my Medal of Honor art project trips. So while someone in the civilian sector, if they have an actual contract with specifically, not in it's kind of like the company aspect, depending on, okay, well, you might be allowed to work in this area, but your clearance doesn't allow you to work over there. In comparison, well, that's that instead. So I've done the best I could. Now again, I haven't allowed certain things. I think I've made that abundantly clear because of security reasons, not because of my knowledge of. I don't have the direct knowledge, and to be quite honest, I really didn't look for certain things. I wouldn't know officially in those references of what to look for, because those are those companies' situations, that's their work, whatever in those hypotheticals of. I just drove around and it was as it was. I took a few pictures in locations such as Arco and Montana, and I'll just leave that at that. In the different capacity, in a different way, in other situations, obviously. So, but there are those reality aspects in comparison to what other people have thought. So where I have taken my work seriously, I cannot say the same because of requirements as far as RSVP situations. So those types of certain aspects, there are different privacy laws for multiple reasons, not just in reference to what is supposed to be considered as a biological adult informed consent or consenting adult aspects, or however you want to word it, it doesn't matter. You still have to be informed fully in genuinity and honesty correctly for it to be an informed consent. All the way to my Medal of Honor art project, trips, artwork, and so on and so forth. For those legalities on the federal level, as well as state and local level. So if there were those who falsely represented themselves in that hypothetical, that is something they have to answer for. Because there would be the official proof for a few reasons as to those factors. And without those clarifications, there are still clarifications. And so, then there's Iowa 2018. If the claim was to actually be beneficial to me and to my work and for security of me, do let me know where that proof actually would be considered as. Because if that's the claim, well then there would be the proof. By now. So if individuals claimed that friendship aspect or what have you in whatever capacities of, well then by the time I got back to the state of Texas, technically beforehand, there would have to be certain mandatory clarifications for that informed aspect instead. Otherwise, then there's March of 2020 that shows the opposite aspects of certain other situations. Yeah, hypothetically. And so, I look forward to getting out of this contract as soon as legally possible regarding this particular apartment complex company. Because if there's any proof of any situations I've brought forward regarding a few factors, well, then I look forward to not having to deal with that, because of that technically would be across state lines because of Washington state. And the original apartment complex that I had moved into was not a part of this company. So only because of the transfer requirements, it would have been great to actually have been capable to do so beforehand, because then I could have actually been back in the state of Texas in time. However, since as long as it took and all those other needless situations that occurred, well, if I had my transfer at the time that I had put it in comparison to hypotheticals, I would have been out in the East Coast area by the time of March or April. I would have had my 30 days of getting everything taken care of. I'd have been up to the East Coast area regarding specifically Liberty Science Center at night before February of 2022. It would have been in 2021. And so I would have had all the paperwork taken care of before essentially about September or October in 2021. And then I would have been capable to transfer back. However, because it took all the way until the end of July, because of those situations, again, I'm not in any acquaintanceship, I'm not in any friendship, I'm not in any familial aspects, I'm not in any contract with any business, because similarly, Washington state would not transfer to the state of Texas regarding that guardian asshole situation. It would be a legal, it's so much paperwork that would be required each and every time. It would be mandatory each and every time. So since that wasn't, and there wasn't anybody I was dating in that capacity, there would be nobody for me to speak with ever regarding my work at that time officially in any situation. So then there's those legalities in those hypotheticals. So in the proof of, well, my thoughts are my thoughts, and if I don't have anybody to discuss with, because this is a lecture, well, then that's the facts. I don't have to. There's no need for me to do so. If there are others who wish to have discussions, well, I guess it depends on who they are. But that's not a mandatory situation for me. It's similar to my scuba diving. It's not mandatory for me to disclose that. It is mandatory regarding certain individuals to contact and schedule an appointment for me by those standards. But that's civilian recreational scuba divers knowing who they would know and those particular aspects of having to get over their viewpoint because of humility in comparison because of their knowledge at that time in 2009. So then, in reference to, again, those particular factors of what is informed consent, no matter what some people might think of themselves, that's what they think of themselves. If that's the truth, then it depends on truth is important. Integrity and truth matter. And so it's very important as far as those factors. Notice no jewelry. I am a jeweler's daughter. So there would be that minimum requirement to my standards. But since that hasn't been a situation, and you can look at each and every official YouTube video of mine for those clarifications and verifications ever since officially bringing that to that point, is as it is. And then there's all of those public locations I've been to, and out in the open in different areas. That would be a requirement now, wouldn't it? Yes, it would for this lecture. For those clarifications and verifications. And so, hypothetically, in case there were any false representations regarding other people and their wishful thoughts regarding certain types, you know. Anyway, those particular factors to keep in mind, because what would a feminazi be is to a male who would not understand boundaries, and what would those legal ramifications be to those situations, because it has to be informed consent. So I have updated my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmealing.com, and I stand for Judeo-Christian values, not the radicalized aspects. I've made it abundantly clear as to those situations and those needless problems regarding certain areas. And so I have stood against that repeatedly. And it was known that I'm an ordained reverend, and I have not converted in any other capacity because I would refuse to. I would completely walk away. Obviously, because I wouldn't ever consent to that type. It has to be actual informed consent in comparison to those hypotheticals. And so, you know, those types of needless problems to those non-consensual aspects, no matter what someone might wish in any way, shape, or form. I have minimum standards. There's also legalities. So I've already clarified that and verified that. And I would not tolerate that ever again, as I have made abundantly clear over and over again. Because then what would the legalities be if those false representations? I've already said no, as would be capable to be proven. And so no means no. That's no translates to non-consensual. Because I have minimum requirements, which have not ever been met. In regards of to actually go through with a few factors, no matter what some might wish. And so then there's those factors regarding my Medal of Honor art project trips, different capacities of the needless problems that I've brought forward. And again, you even have this word regarding that starts with a J and ends with a D. Brought that forward in the Library of Congress, you'd think that that would actually be taken care of properly. In comparison, it's only been since 2010 that some of that began, and what has actually occurred to actually assist me in comparison to the needless problems that I've repeatedly, needlessly dealt with. So, no matter what, such wishful aspects as to those needless problems, as to the unwanted, unnecessary, undesired, unpreferred situations, as to the hypotheticals. For clarification. Because of what I personally view for my best interests, by what my versions are in comparison to those needless types. So what is actual feminism in comparison? I believe that feminism is where the female actually has a choice, not an non-consensual choice, no, an informed choice, where there's actual, genuine consent in comparison to those types in that hypothetical. Though there hasn't been any proof that anything has mattered in the general aspect because of the way situations have been, because of what that actually would be instead. So, thank you for tuning into this lecture. Yet again, a lecture, not a discussion. There's no such thing as a discussion regarding a lecture. No matter what wishful thoughts, that's not a lecture. As far as those hypotheticals being changed in regards to discussion, no, that's just another lecture in comparison. It's not a discussion at all because of what I consider an actual discussion. And that's not going to change as far as what I view as an actual discussion. In comparison, does not matter at all any other way. So, hopefully in those regards in comparison to those feminazi types, male or female, males can be just as feminazi, sexist, machismo, unchivalrous, brutish, arrogant, haughty individuals as females can, as far as feminazis. I'm a feminist. I believe in women's rights and civil rights. Feminazis don't. It's very simple. Feminazis don't believe in the constitutional rights and amendments for anybody, because they even use it against their own. In comparison to feminists who believe in that equally in comparison to feminazis. Proof as to the patterns of behavior as well. So feminazis wouldn't care about the 10 Commandments in conjunction with the aspects of the Constitution of the United States of America. Feminists would, because the 10 Commandments are within the constitutional rights and amendments of the United States of America, unlike what feminazis do. It's very simple. Feminazis would not be humane because they wouldn't know what humanity actually is because of the proof. A feminist would know what humanity is and would actually stand up for that humanity in comparison. A feminist wouldn't ever make any attempt to oppress, whereas that's why there's feminazis as to the difference. A feminazi that didn't get their way would do things to cause needless problems because they didn't get their way. Whereas a feminist would make attempts to actually have discussions, though would give lectures, because a feminazi wouldn't. Because a feminazi, in my opinion, doesn't have the intellectual capacity to actually have mature adult discussions with etiquette and respect. Only a feminist would actually have that capability to verbalize and discuss or lecture in this particular official YouTube channel video of my case. Instead. So a feminazi would know about what occurred in Iowa 2018 and wouldn't do anything that would actually be beneficial regarding my health, because that would require genuine truth in discussion. In comparison, since that has not occurred in the hypothetical, then that would translate to feminazism, if I am accurate. Because only a feminist would actually go for that, to have those discussions in truth, compared to false representation and feminazism compared to. Common sense. Go to my website, www.susanmeeling.com. Today is the 8th of May, 2022.